1993, helicopters dropped American soldiers into the middle of Mogadishu, Somalia. The assignment was clear: to abduct several top lieutenants of a Somalian warlord and return to base. The mission as a whole should have lasted about an hour. Everything changed when the first of 2 American Black Hawk helicopters was shot down over the course of 17 deadly hours. Troops were pinned down in a maze of small alleys, engaged in a long and hostile firefight, the most intense U.S. combat engagement since the Vietnam War. A pilot was carried away by an angry mob and taken prisoner, and many people died. It's been 20 years since what started as an assault operation would end as a rescue mission. To talk about this historical battle, I'm joined on stage by Matthew Eversmann. He's a retired first sergeant in the U.S. Army. Matt's service in Somalia as a ranger and Chalk 4 leader was the center of the film Black Hawk Down, trailer that we've just seen. Craig Nixon, next to me, spent 29 years in the Army, retiring at the rank of Brigadier General. In the Battle of Mogadishu, Craig oversaw the rescue operation and was a liaison officer to Task Force Ranger. And we're very pleased to have with us Jerry Bruckheimer. For nearly 30 years, Jerry has produced some of the most successful TV and film projects, one of them being Black Hawk Down. Jerry, I'm going to start with you since we've just seen a clip from your movie. This was not an obvious movie for a big budget Hollywood project. It's subtle, it's dark, it's ambiguous. It does show a lot of the ennobling sides of war, but it is not triumphalist. And so the first question I wanted to ask you is, why was it important for you to make this movie? Why did you want to make Black Hawk Down? And then I have a quick follow-up for you.
First of all, I want to thank Tina for having us here and kind of honoring Black Hawk Down and the men who fought and died there. You know, I'm a big supporter of our military and our veterans, and they're the real heroes who protect our shores and protect democracy, not only in this country but around the world. And I believe you got to tell their stories, not always their glorious stories, but their heroism and their patriotism, because they're not paid a lot of money for what they do. They do it because they love their country and want to protect it. And this was a story that we read very early on. It was a series of articles in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and we were exposed to it and thought it was really an inside look into what these men have to deal with under really horrible conditions. Unexpected conditions, and how their training kicks in, and how they support their comrades and try to fight for the man next to them. And I think it's a story that I think it's universal. And war has been going on since the beginning of time, and these courageous men live this horrible experience, and people don't know about it. And what I thought it would be wonderful to expose the world to their heroism and what they're all about. What we love doing as a filmmaker, I love doing, is telling stories that are what I call process. Gets you inside a world that the audience will never be a part of, but shows what actually happens. We have a TV series called CSI, which gives you an inside look into what these detectives do. And I love, we did Top Gun, which is another movie, gives you some process of aviators, naval aviators. So this was an important film for me to bring to the public. And, you know, we had a very hard time getting it off the ground. I was at Walt Disney at the time, and once we developed the material, I read it and said, this is not something the Walt Disney Company would want to do. So we took it out, and fortunately Sony and Revolution, Joe Roth, supported it and financed it, and that's how we put it together.
Well, you answered my follow-up, which was the challenge in getting this movie made. Let me just ask both you, Matt, and Craig, just very quickly give us a sense of why you think this story, but not just the story, this event, connected so viscerally with the American people. Why don't you start, Craig, and then Matt?
Well, I also want to thank Tina for inviting me. It's really poignant. I literally just attended the 20-year reunion in Dallas last weekend. So I think it really impacted, one, because you had, I mean, it's an old phrase, but you had uncommon valor was really commonplace. And not just intensity, but duration. When I think the American public was surprised to find out we were in Somalia. I think the images that they saw on CNN were what were in their mind, and this was really the background behind, the Rangers that were literally fighting for their lives to accomplish the mission. And I think Jerry and his team, and really Scott, did an incredible job of portraying that in the film, and I thank you for that.
Tina, it goes without saying, thank you very much for including me with this great panel and putting it together. I would just add on, folks, that, in my opinion, after 12 years in the war on terror, this movie came out I actually saw it in December of 2001. And what I found over the last decade is that, believe it or not, there are a lot of folks that really aren't touched by the war on terror. They don't have children or grandchildren or family members involved. And so when I talk to them and I tell you, you watch this movie Black Hawk Down, you have a really fair and accurate and pretty authentic view of what urban combat is like, and ostensibly at its worst. So just to bookend to that comment, I think that it is the reference point, both the book and the movie, that people are going to look at when they talk about getting involved in these kinds of conflicts in these countries we've never heard of.
The movie came out just a couple of months after 9/11, so it was a pretty raw time in the country. It was also a time when we were rallying around the troops. Jerry, my understanding is that there was a lot of debate about when to release the movie. It was supposed to come out in later, and you decided to move it up. Is that right? Tell us about the conversation that you all had, given that the country had just been through this horrific experience.
Yeah, after 9/11, it was, there was a lot of fear about showing a military movie, especially something that was not exactly a bright light. It's a very intense film, and it's one of the few films that we never actually previewed, because you really can't get a sense what the audience feels about the movie, because when they walk out, they're kind of shell-shocked. So we didn't preview it. But Ridley Scott is an acclaimed director, Academy Award nominated director, and we felt that the film had the possibility of getting some nominations. So we actually moved the release up to open it limitedly in December, so you could qualify for the Academy Awards. And fortunately, we were right, because it got a number of nominations and it actually won some Academy Awards. So I guess we did the right thing.
Matt, when you, shortly before you went out there, you find out that you're going to be taking over this Chalk 4, and you have these young guys under your command, most of whom hadn't seen combat. You hadn't seen combat. Just talk to us about what that was like, what you learned about yourself, the leadership lessons, and how you kept it together psychologically once you got into that, in the middle of that carnage.
One of the joys about being in the military, and certainly as an Army guy, is that it's this self-licking ice cream cone of leadership development and training. I mean, everything is a progressive, step-by-step day all the time. We had been in a couple of firefights prior to October 3rd, and subsequently when, by the time I was put in charge of the Chalk, everybody on the team had gone through that test, not to sound any braver or cavalier than the next guy. But I throw this out to you all. It's a very scary, at least to me, feeling when you leave the wire, knowing what the enemy is capable of doing and knowing what happens on the battlefield. I mean, as silly as that sounds, it's a pretty scary notion to be willingly in harm's way. as you get on the battlefield and things unravel, as Murphy's Law happens almost immediately all the time, you find yourself in this sort of push me, pull you relationship. You know, you're looking at your men to make sure that they, and ladies today, you know, overseas, but in 1993, you know, with all the boys, looking to them as a foundation and realizing, hey, you know, if these young guys are doing the right thing, I, as a leader, can certainly pull my weight and stand up in front and be tall and look brave. And I think you found out it was a two-way street, that, you know, the men look at you and they realize, hey, Sergeant Eversmann, or my leader, is standing up, seemingly undaunted, and that gives them a refreshing, reassuring feeling. I mean, I'm no psychologist, but that was my experience.
Craig, give us a sense of your role in this mission, and just sort of lay out where you were when the first Black Hawk helicopter went down, and what how the mission changed and how you were involved in that.
Yes, I was actually the liaison officer to 10th Mountain, so I would go out on operations with them, particularly to do quick reaction, to prepare them for quick reaction force if the Rangers got in trouble. I was part of Task Force Ranger. I would go back to the compound once a week. I was in the compound that day when the assault launched. I observed the first aircraft go down and was actually next to General Garrison at the time.
There's that moment in the movie, and I think in the book as well, where he says, "We've lost the initiative." Can you remember the feeling that? Do you remember feeling that this is a kind of a turning point here, or is that something that you sort of think about in retrospect?
Well, I felt that, but a little bit later in the operation. So when the first aircraft went down, we had a good plan. We had a quick reaction force established. It went in. When the second aircraft went down, we did not have a plan at that point. So General Garrison actually turned to me at that point and said, put together a quick reaction force to get out to the second aircraft site. In reality, that quick reaction force was remnants, Sergeant Strucker and remnants of the Rangers. It was cooks, it was mechanics, it was anybody who could carry a rifle. So it was not a coherent force. It was literally whoever can go out and help. And we launched out of that compound not knowing where the second crash site was. So you have a force that you put together that's essentially ad hoc. You're going to a location that you don't know. There's a tremendous amount of activity that Tom Matthews, who I think is in the audience. So Tom, are you out there? I apologize. Tom was the commander of the air aviation I thought was going to be here today. So in that portion, about halfway through that is where I thought we lost the initiative. And later during the operation, I believed at the time we had we were at risk of losing the entire force.
Jerry, I want to do this quickly because we've got another clip that we're going to see, and we're going to dig into some meatier issues. But tell us very quickly about the logistics of putting together this movie, and how both Jesse Helms and the King of Morocco were involved.
Well, you know, it was difficult to put this together. Once we had the financing, we went to Washington and met with William Cohn, who was a big supporter of the book, and General Shelton, who was the head of, I guess he was the head of the Joint Chiefs at the time, and the Secretary of the Army, and they were all fans of the book and were certainly supporters of us making the film. But then getting the equipment and getting the men was another issue, because in Morocco at the time, it was between ambassadors. So you had a charge who was the head of the Moroccan embassy for us, and certainly she didn't want any activity that was negative towards her, and if somebody got hurt during the making of this movie, she didn't want it on her docket. So she did everything possible to make sure that we couldn't get our equipment or our men into Morocco, which was very difficult. And we had no SOFA agreement with Morocco at the time. That's bringing foreign forces into a sovereign country. And we were 6 weeks into filming. We had no Black Hawk helicopters. We had no Rangers. We were going to end up using Hueys as the backup, which was scary because the movie's called Black Hawk Down. So we reached out to some of the supporters, and Jesse Helms was certainly a supporter of the book, and he called the King of Morocco and actually negotiated a deal to bring in the Rangers and the Blackhawks. But then we still had the ambassador, or not the ambassador, but the person in charge of Morocco who still didn't want them to come in. And we got, I think, a congressman from California who called her up and said, look, we're going to pull your funding. We're going to, make sure you end up in Ethiopia unless they come, unless you let them in. And that's what broke the logjam. So 6 weeks in, we finally got our Blackhawks and our Rangers to finish the filming.
Jerry, you were kind enough to bring another clip in the movie. Why don't you set it up quickly, and then we'll look at it, and then we'll get into a few more issues based on that clip.
This is the very end of the movie. It's where Matt is talking to one of his fallen comrades about heroism, and I think it speaks for itself when you see it.
Such a powerful ending. Matt, that line about heroism, does that capture your views? Is that something that you agreed with about how it just sometimes happens that way?
I got to say, you can't answer that question without sounding awfully self-righteous and pious at times. So I'll kind of back into it and tell you, you see on the battlefields today, whether it's 1993, incredible young men and women doing unbelievably courageous things, in harm's way. And they do it just because it's an event that has to happen. They grab their buddy and pull him out under fire. They run into the aircraft. They do for every uniform in the room. I mean, you all have seen it. And, I don't think anybody does it for a moniker. I think that we do it because, like you saw in the movie, it really is because of your Ranger buddies or your mates on your left and right. That's about the best. So, yeah, I agree with that, I think.
Craig, you used a phrase when we had a chance to talk before, deliberate courage. These guys, like Hoot in the movie, going back in over and over again. What is deliberate courage? Talk about that.
Well, I think, in reactive courage, you're responding to an event, your muscle memory kicks in, the adrenaline kicks in, you respond as you're trained, and there are true acts of valor in reactive. Deliberate is when you have time to think about it, you understand fully the consequences that you're going into, and you choose to do it. The reality is the majority of people that I know and have talked to in the Quick Reaction Force that went out multiple times fully believed they would get killed on the second or third time they went out. And they still chose to go out because they had Rangers there. And that's what I call deliberate courage.
And I want to pick up on that. They fully believed they were going to die. And I've talked to a lot of these guys who say that a kind of a calm settles over you, that it's almost a primordial survival instinct. It makes you a more focused warrior. Matt, you were out there. At one point, you're lying in a Humvee flat on your back, and you're realizing that you're a huge target and that you might and would likely get shot at any moment or perhaps die. Do you recall that sense of calm that comes over you, or have you heard people talk about that?
I've heard people talk about it. I have to say I don't know if I really witnessed the calming piece. But I truly can tell you I remember sitting there on this moving Humvee, sitting on top of somebody else, lying on my back, unable to sit up because of the weight of my body armor like a turtle, and literally, bullets flying over, and thinking, my gosh, this is really going to hurt. I hope it doesn't hurt that badly. And again, you sound awfully brave on stage saying that, but I to this day, I can remember just thinking, just hope it doesn't hurt.
I got to ask about, there's courage, there's bravery, Valerie, and there's fear. And people experience fear in this kind of combat. And Command Sergeant Major Chris Ferris, who couldn't make it, couldn't be on the panel because of the shutdown, talked to him about this. And he said some pretty, to me, surprising things. I want to read something that he said to me about fear at Black Hawk Down, where he served as a Delta guy. He said he saw plenty of combatants in Somalia take themselves out of the fight. These are his words. You had people curling up into balls of fear, taking themselves out of the fight, shaming themselves, and disgracing the uniform. Craig, is that something that you saw?
Yeah, well, I think I'll put it in perspective. I mean, I was in combat before Mogadishu. I was in a lot of combat after Mogadishu, and I've seen people quit in every fight I've been in. There's a big difference between danger and fear. I mean, danger is real. Fear is potential outcomes in your mind, and it's the ability to set those aside and continue to operate that really separates people. So, I mean, I don't denigrate what they did, but quite frankly, I mean, it's kind of the Agincourt speech of, you know, those men that have fought and bled with me shall be my brothers, and those that chose not to shall think themselves lesser men because they were not with us. I mean, this is an ongoing, this is not a new environment. So
My reaction to that, and we're running out of time, but my reaction to that was pure empathy as someone who'd never been in a situation like that. But that's not the warrior's reaction. It's viewed as a more selfish act, right?
I think, you know, everybody has choices they have to make, and if you want to be in part of those type of organizations, the expectation is that you will live up to the Rangers' Creed, and one of the Rangers' Creed is, I'll never leave a fallen comrade to fall in the hands of the enemy. So in reality, that's a commitment from every Ranger to another Ranger. So from a Ranger's perspective, you failed to live up to the creed that we all committed to.
Okay, and just very briefly, if we could just talk for a moment about the lessons of Black Hawk Down, quickly in terms of tactically and strategically. Matt, you want to talk about the tactics?
Well, you know, there were some obvious lessons learned. I mean, if you read the book or see the movie, you know, bring all your mission essential equipment with you always. You've got to, you know, have a good succession plan in your chain of command and all that. You know, all these things. Are we going to do daylight raids if we don't have to? Are we going to fast rope on objectives if we could offset? I mean, there are bunches and bunches of things, but, you know, at the most acute point, I think, you know, you realize that you got to have everything you're going to need for every contingency always, which is almost impossible to do. Yet we require these men and women today to do it, and that seems simple, but that was a hard one, and I was absolutely guilty of not having everything with me at times.
And Craig, the main strategic lesson from this operation,
Well,
and have we really learned it?
I don't know. I was a captain at the time, so strategy was well above me. The two lessons that came out for me that have been enduring for the rest of my career and even now in what I do in private security is you have to change your tactics. As the enemy changes their tactics, you have to change your tactics. And you can argue that we, in fact, didn't do that on the 3rd and 4th, and that led to really the aircraft coming down. And the second is when you lose momentum in combat, unlike you know, we talk about it in a football game, but when you lose momentum in combat, you bleed to get it back, whether it's at the tactical level, the operational level, or strategic level. I mean, soldiers are wounded and killed so that you can regain momentum. And from the second crash until the next day, we were trying to regain momentum, and at the cost of 19 Rangers.
Well, we've run out of time, but thank you so much for being part of the Heroes Summit. It was a fascinating discussion. Appreciate it.
Thank you.